So my name is Avi. I've been an entrepreneur for the past 15 years. My first company was called Viselia, and we developed a dashboard monitoring for the energy consumption in big buildings. It was quite successful because we sold the company about 4 years ago to Schneider Electric. Schneider Electric is one of the big players in the IT green. And then we decided to start a new company called Ubiq. Our customer in Ubiq are brands that needs to understand their marketing presence on physical shops. So instead of sending their own people to check the price and how many products they have in shops, they publish mission to our application, and anyone that is in the shop can register to the mission, fill in a few questions, take a few pictures, and get paid between 5 to 7 euros. It takes 10 minutes to answer the little survey, and so the brand can know in real time how they are doing in all their shops. The application that you see here is our mobile app. We developed it using Famous, and it looks pretty nice. I don't know what you think about that, but I am amazed of the results that it gives to use Famous to build that. When you build an application, can you hear me? Yeah. So when you build an application, at some point you will need some data, and if you think about that, it's a pretty complex challenge because you will have multiple devices accessing the application. You have maybe firewalls in the middle. You have maybe multiple data sources that you need to access. And if you need to build that by yourself, you will spend a lot of time trying to figure out how it should work. So first, you have security issue. The AAA here stands for authentication, authorization, and auditing. It's not like the AAA that you saw in the TDD in the previous keynote. And you have to build a data store for your users. You have to build ACL, roles, groups of users. It's a kind of a very complex subject. It can be very time-consuming. The other issue is that you will have to deal with multiple data sources. Some of them are going to be SQL, some of them no SQL. Maybe you have some data source that you need to access through SOAP, and you need to figure out how you can do that. And you have also all kind of REST services that you may want to combine into your own application. Let's say, for example, you want to save picture. You want to use Cloudinary for saving pictures. So you will have to figure out what should be the connector between your backend and the REST service of Cloudinary. And then your application grows, and you have too much data. So on your own side, you will have to split your data source. Maybe you will have to specialize some of your data into a security store and a business logic store. And while you are doing that, your application is already deployed, and you want that operation to be completely transparent for the client side. So if you don't think about that carefully in the beginning, it can be challenging. And the last thing that you want to do, you want to run some post-processing or pre-processing each time you save an entity. You want to run some data validation rules. Also, if you need to build that by yourself, it can be a very long and painful process. So you have two kinds of solution. The one kind of the solution is called BaaS or MBaaS. It stands for Mobile Backend as a Service. And you have several companies that are dealing with that. The first one is Sparse. It's one of the first service providing a RESTful API. It's like you can think of it as a Node.js server that encapsulates a connection to MongoDB, and they give you access to the server through their REST API. You don't have to install anything, and you're good to go after signing in for starting populating and querying your data. They've been acquired by Facebook 2 years ago for an amount of $85 million, I think. You have Azure Mobile Services. They are also very interesting. They have a lot of integration points with mobile services like push notification, device management, and they give you the ability to come with your own NPM package. So if you want to use some node modules, you can, using their infrastructure, just install them on their side, and you don't have to deal with with all the hosting stuff. You have any present that is one of the latest coming into that space. You also have Firebase. So Firebase is neat for its integration with AngularJS. They offer you what they call the three-way data binding. That means that in real time, you can bind a variable to your scope, and you will get, without any refreshing, new data as they are coming to the backend. But they are kind of limited in the query syntax that they're giving you. So if you want to do some dashboard with complex analytics, it's not going to be a suitable solution. You have Kinvey. So Kinvey is focused on enterprise. They are really interesting because of their extension point and the security that they gives you. They have like a data store for the users, but you're limited. You cannot write any JavaScript on the server side using any NPM component. So it's kind of difficult when you want to do complex stuff. But we've been using Kinvey for the past 2 years, and we build the Ubique application with Kinvey. And then you have quite other space of solution that is do it by yourself. And the first thing that you could do is you could use Express to build your own server and write the routes, write the data layer connection, whether you want to connect to Mongo through the standard driver, or maybe use Mongoose, or maybe some kind of ORM. But you will have to do everything by yourself, so it's very flexible, but it's involving in the code that is required. You have API, which is kind of nicer for their configuration stuff, so you have a little bit less code to write. You have Sales. Sales is interesting because they have an ORM approach, and they also have some capabilities for doing real time. But the one I want to talk today is Loopback, and Loopback is awesome because not only you have the ORM, but you also have what I call the isomorphic JavaScript, and I'm going to explain exactly what it means to have isomorphic. The company behind Loopback is called StrongLoop. They've been created in 2012. They have a funded Series A of about $8 million. They are about 30 people, 20 of them are developers and are the main contributor for Node.js. And they are responsible for Express. So they host the Express solution. They also develop something that you may know called Node Inspector. If you want to debug some Node.js code, you can use Node Inspector for doing that. And they have also like an NPM package, a bit simpler, called Node-REG. So they are very serious people. And it's good when you jump and you go to bed with a new framework to understand who you're going to sleep with and if they are going to stay for a long time. So Loopback is built on top of Express. That means that you can take an existing Express code and just replace the first require Express in the beginning of your code by requires Loopback, and it will work exactly the same, okay? And then, on top of that, they provide a framework that is optimized for building APIs. And your APIs are going to be automatically documented through Swagger. I'm going to show you what is Swagger. But Swagger is a website that you can see all your entities, and you can, in live, interact with them, do a post, do a get, and see the results. And they have a model-driven architecture. That means that when you start a Loopback project, you define your entities, you define the ACL rules, the security about your entities, the relationship between your entities, and then you define the data source, and you can swap them around. So you can start with an in-memory data store, and then decide that you want to go with Mongo, and then maybe swap to CouchDB, or maybe swap to SQL Server, and all the code that you've written is going to work exactly the same. So it's really neat to be able to change like that the data source. And it's isomorphic, so when you're going to build your server, you have a command line to generate an Angular SDK that you can put in your client side, and you will write exactly the same code on the client and on the server. So you don't have to learn a new syntax or a new way to accessing your data. You will have that for free. And they provide also, for those who don't like the console, a GUI where you will be able to scaffold your application, but also to monitor your application. And this is part of their paying services. So you can have a Node.js, any Node.js application, and you can run some metrics on the memory consumption, on the bottleneck of your application through their GUI offer. If we look at the Loopback architecture, you see that they are built around what they call microservices. So in the middle, you will see that you have push notification, user and ACL management, file storage management. We're going to use that in the little demo to upload a file to a Loopback server. Geolocation, so you can have queries for that deals with geolocation. Offline synchronization, which is neat and it's very new. And in the middle, you can expose through the REST API your entities. When you want to access a data source, you will have to use either an existing connector or maybe write yourself a connector. It's a very simple piece of code that you can write, and you just have to implement a few methods to be able to access let's say, Cloudinary, and give the impression that the data that Cloudinary holds is on your Loopback server directly. And then you have the Angular client side, which is the isomorphic stuff. So you must be confused right now. So if you have to take two IDs from the speech, the first one is the full stack stuff, isomorphic. You know how to write JavaScript on the client side, and you should be able to reuse this knowledge to build your backend, and also because full stack rocks, okay? And the second thing is that it's very friendly with Angular, and the SDK client that they give you wraps ng resource, and we'll see how you use it in your application. How do you get started? They have a CLI, so you install npm install globally strong loop, and then you have a small CLI called SLC, and you start a new project. And the SLC CLI is in fact a Yeoman generator. And you have here subgenerator for scaffolding a new model or scaffolding a new data source. And when you're ready, you use LBNG, which is another CLI, to just scaffold your SDK client. Okay. Let's try some code. So what we're going to build is a small Instagram application built with Ionic on the client side. We are going to upload some picture from the client side to a Loopback server. And the architecture is pretty simple. So we have in the middle a Loopback server that is going to run on Heroku, backed up by a MongoDB hosted on MongoLab. And on the client side, we are going to use Ionic and publish the application to something that is awesome if you build mobile app called TestFairy. So TestFairy is an Israeli company, so it's double awesome, that gives you the ability to monitor how your mobile users are using the application. And you will see some recording of the application while I'm using it, so you can monitor your beta tester community in real time and see where your application is working and where it's not working. So let's write some code. So we're going to start with the server side. So I already scaffold using SLC loopback, the SLC loopback command, a small server-side application. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new data source. I'm going to add, can you see my screen? It's big enough? A MongoDB data source. Okay, so he asked me a few questions, and here I'm going to select MongoDB as the driver for the data source. I'm going to create a new data source for storing the file, and this data source is a file storage. And instead of using MongoDB here, we're going to use another connector. And the connector is called Loopback Component Storage. Right? And you can see here that while I'm scaffolding the application, the data source.json describe my list of data source. So I have the Mongo one and the file storage one. The file storage needs some further configuration. So I'm just going to replace here what has been scaffolded by this code. And you can see here that I'm telling that I want to use the file system for storing my data. I could have used Amazon. I could have used Rackspace. And the root for storing the file is going to be a folder, a local folder called storage. Then, because we are going to publish the application on Heroku, I need a proc file. So let me just create here a small proc file. And I have here my proc file thing. This is my entry point for the application where you're going to run on Heroku. This is the command that you have to execute. And because we are going to run on Heroku, we want to override the data source. So they give you also the ability to use environment variable and to create a new data source file here that expose some that override some of the connection for the MongoDB stuff. So instead of using a local MongoDB instance, I'm telling Loopback, when you run on Heroku, I want you to override the URL with a configurable variable coming from Heroku. Okay? And this is going to point to Mongo Lab, Mongo server. All right, so we're good to go. And you can see here that I've already added Heroku. I have here some Heroku config. So I should see two variables here, one for the MongoDB stuff and the other one telling that I'm running Heroku. And I can just push to Heroku, right? And this will go live on Heroku. I already done that, so I can open here the application. Oh, no, I need something else. I need here in the model stuff. No, I need some models. Sorry, I forgot about that. So let me just create some models. So I'm gonna create two models. So for storing the file, I'm gonna need a metadata instance, which is called image. Okay. So this is my model name. It's gonna be backed up by Mongo. It's a persisted model. And it should be available through REST. And here, I'm going to say on that entity, I need a title, which is a string. I need a file name attribute, which is also a string. I need maybe created at field that is going to be a date. And maybe an updated at property, which is also going to be a date. Okay? I'm going to create another model called what?
SLC.
SLC. And this time it's the image container. So the image container, it's the entity that represents the file store on the instance. And here, it's backed up by the file storage. And it's just a model. It's not a persisted model. We don't need any CRUD capabilities on the file storage. It's exposed, and it doesn't have any property. Okay? And while I'm doing that, you see here I have a new folder called common with my models. I can see the image container. I can see the image with the property. I could add them here. And I have here an extension point. So in that file, I can write some custom code. They call that an hook operation. It's some kind of code that is going to run before or after a save operation, for example. And in that piece of code, I want automatically loop back to populate the created dat and the updated at with the relevant value. Okay? So now I have a proper working loopback server. We can pop up Arc here, which is their GUI tool. And it's here. And you can see I could have done all that operation using that tool instead of writing a command line. I have my image entity with the file, with all the fields. I have the image container, and I have the file storage and the Mongo data source. So now I can just publish the application to Heroku and open the application on Heroku. So I will do a Heroku open.
Where did you define the routes of the API?
It's defined for me. So where did I define the routes? I didn't have to define any routes because it's generic CRUD. So the loopback knows about the route, and we're going to see them here. So they have an explorer here. And you see, so I am on Heroku. I am seeing my two entities plus the users. Users came built in. I could have canceled that. And in the image, you see here all the routes that have been created. If we do a get, for example, I have a small tryout button here. This is Swagger, okay? And you see that for the moment, I don't have any entity on the server. If I want to try a post, I have here a simple way to do that. I can just populate the file name and the title here. And let's say Toto and Toto. And we're going to save that. And you see, OK. And you're going to see that the entity has been created. Okay, and you see here the created dat coming from the hook that are wrote in the image file. I can also delete that entity using the delete endpoint, passing in the ID, and I should go back here to the get and should see an empty response after I deleted the data. All right? So now we can start the client side. So the client side, I'm using a generator that I wrote called the Angular Famous Ionic Generator. And it's careful for me already an application. I'm going to add some new stuff. So you see here, it comes with a lot of stuff. You have a gulp, help, task. And you can see all the things that you can do automatically in your application with absolutely no code. You can use this generator. So we're going to use the generator to scaffold. If I do a typo, you tell me. To scaffold a new module, we're going to call the module common. All right? And we're going to use it to scaffold inside that module a constant. So common, and we're going to call it loopback constant. Is that right? And we need maybe a controller. In the common module, and we call the controller home. All right? I can do a gulp lint, and it will lint automatically for me all the JavaScript files. It's OK. I can do a gulp karma, and gulp karma will run unit tests. So while I scaffold the application, each Angular component comes with its own test file. I should see here that the loopback constant and the home controller are fully tested for the moment, but there is no code, so it's fine. And I can start now a browserify instance of my application because I want, while I'm writing the code, to see live how the application evolves. So this will pop up for me, a browser sync, sorry. It's browser sync. So this task is doing a lot of things. We're using browserify under the curtains. It's distributing the application, minifying the image, opening the browser. And here, if I open a new instance of the browser, let's say localhost 500, and I put it here, okay, you can see the home controller or the home page being displayed. So let's switch to mobile. And reload that. Okay, so now we're going to write some code. So we are going to, we are going here to come back to the server side. And to lbng server.js client lb services.js. This will scaffold for us the SDK client. Okay, we can close that. And we are going here to copy that file from the server to our client. So you see, this is the LB service. You can see the user stuff, and you can see here at the end some of the stuff about the image. There should be here. Here, okay? So I have instance of my services that I can use on my client side, accessing the loopback server. So we're going to use our constant to tell Angular where exactly you should get the information from Heroku, okay? And in the index.js of our application, this file, we are going to require a few things. So we're going to require the LBL service coming from Loopback. We're going to require Angular moment. And we're going to require another open source project of mine, which is called Ubique Angular Core, which has like a camera upload directive. So we can upload picture using Cordova from the device. And because I have injected now those components, I need to define them as here as dependency of my module. Okay? And the second thing I need to do, I need to here, so let me just go full screen for the moment. We're gonna attach the controller that we created to the main root. And here, I'm going to configure loopback to use the constant I've just scaffolded and to tell it this is the address of the loopback server. OK, so if we look here at the application, it should still work, no change. We didn't write anything. So let's see some visual content. So we're going to change the home page. And here, I'm just going to, just to get some time, it's just a simple Ionic view. And in that view, you have one header here, a header bar. You see the header bar. On the second, you have a sub-header here, which use the Yo image capture directive for accessing the camera. And then in the content, we are using a repeat on something that does not exist in our scope yet, but we will populate it to display the images. Okay, so if we come back now to the controller, and here in the controller, I'm also gonna pass the code. And this is a GitHub project, so you can see all of that pretty easily online. And I'm gonna replace that code with this one. And what we do here is we have basically two functions. We have a load image function using the image service from Loopback, doing a simple find. Okay, this returns a promise, and we use the promise to build the SRC URL of the image using a file storage Loopback component and telling it, okay, this is the base URL of the Loopback server. This is the name of the image. Build for me the URL that brings back the image, the get. And in the do capture, we do the opposite. We use the capture handler directive to get back an image and a name, file name, and then we do an upload to Loopback. And when the upload is done, we're using again the image metadata entity to create the file name and the title. Okay, so that the load image will have access to that. So let me save that, and we should be able to here upload an image. And hop. So we have uploaded the image to the Heroku instance, and we are seeing back in the application the end result. And so the last piece of the puzzle is just to, this is not yet a mobile app, okay? But I have a gulp task that I can use called gulp Cordova TestFairy that is responsible for building the binaries in Android and in iOS of my mobile app, sending them to TestFairy so that any beta tester that I have in my list of beta user can receive a mail, install the application on their own phone, and start playing with that. So let me just here show you how it looks in real. So if I open Reflector here, and I use my phone to connect to Reflector. So this is my phone. This is the app. You can see the image, and I can upload a new image. Like that.
As it uploads, can you talk about the isomorphic aspect that you
That's it. So there was a question about the
Isomorphic aspect.
so the isomorphic aspect. So you have two methodology for doing isomorphic using Loopback. The one I showed you is really integrated with Angular. So you scaffold your model. When you are ready and you have written all your relationship between the entities, all the hooking that you need to do, you just use the lbng CLI and you get an Angular file that you can put in your own code, and you have access to the image entity or the image container entity, and you can do a find, a create, an update, etc. They have, so it's really working well, as you saw, but they have another methodology that is more related to browserify. So you can reuse the model files that we wrote in the beginning into your client-side code, assuming that you're using browserify to package your client code application. And then you will get something more, which is the ability to deal with offline, online synchronization. So they use a remote connector for accessing the Loopback server. And this remote connector is smart enough to populate in your local storage instance while you're offline, and then dealing with the conflict while the connection comes back. So these are the two different ways that you can deal with.
What is the name of that specific element?
It's called offline store. If you look at they have a repo called Loopback examples. You look at the example called offline storage or something like that. You will find the exact source code that you need to implement to use that. Any other question?
Questions. First one, you talked a lot about security. What exactly do you implement?
So I didn't do any security. I accepted the default security option, but here you have a sub generator of Loopback called ACL, okay? And you can choose the entity that you want to secure, let's say image. You can choose whether you want to secure all the methods or a single method, read, write, execute, or all the type of methods. And then you can deny all the unauthenticated users, or you can choose who has the right to see the picture. So this is the way you're going to use Loopback to deal with your ACL, and then you can define roles and groups of users and go quite deep into the definition of the security.
The second thing is about flexibility. I see it generates a lot of routes.
No, it didn't generate any routes. What you saw is this folder, a common folder, we just have simple JSON and JS file. That's it. The Swagger knows how to inspect your models and build dynamically his own interface, but you don't have to deal with any root here. So forget about the roots. When you're working with Loopback, you should forget about the root. You should be focused on the entity, and you should define on your entities the method that you want to expose to the external world, and this will populate the roots automatically.